Hello you lovely lot and welcome to a new video. Today I'm going to be continuing a series I started quite a while ago where I'm creating illustrations of each of my D&D characters and telling you a bit about them. You might notice this video is pretty long, even longer than the last one where I talked about Vespertine, and that's because I have a lot to say about this character, not just because the campaign has been going on for longer, but just because I love him so much. I try not to have favourites, and Taryn is probably the more well-known one and my baby, but at the same time, out of my active characters, I think at this point that this boy is my favourite. So this is Ez, and he's a character I play in a campaign called Beyond Skeletons. This is a campaign based on the Ghosts of Saltmarsh module, but with a whole lot of homebrew created by our DM. In fact, the whole campaign has essentially been picked up and moved into our DM setting. If you're familiar with a podcast called Draw Your Swords, which I'll link below, Beyond Skeletons takes place in the same setting, as it's run by the same DM and features two of the same players. I've also had the opportunity to add to the world by creating the place that my character came from, as have the other players. So it's a really nice collaborative effort that allows everyone to feel involved. All of our campaigns are very RP heavy, very character driven, and even when we're playing from a module, a lot of my DMs will add their own spin to it and really make each part of the story relevant to the characters. So our party in Beyond Skeletons is a ragtag bunch who have been known to refer to themselves as pirates, and we've been known to do the same. But honestly, they're not really pirates. They've never actually committed any piracy, they just really like the aesthetic. Because if you have the opportunity to wear billowing shirts with puffy sleeves, why not? Their ship does display a flag with a skeleton on it, but if you take a closer look, you'll see that it's actually made out of underwear belonging to every member of the party sewn together and painted with a skeleton. So I'm not quite sure if it has the intended effect of looking fearsome, but it is unique at least. So Ez is a half-orc, his mother is an orc and his dad is a human, and he's a storm sorcerer. His family have sailed merchant vessels for many generations, and he was born at sea in the middle of a storm, because he's been dramatic since birth, and he spent much of his childhood on the waves. Ez's hometown is an island called Zephyrus, which is part of a chain of tropical islands which are self-governed, and they're a popular stop-off point for sailors and holidaymakers alike. When Ez was 18, his mother Brex passed on her pride and joy, a ship called the Blue Morpho, to him and made him captain. He'd basically been training his whole life for that moment and never really had any intention of doing anything else, wanting to continue in the same line of work as the rest of his family. Ez set off with a crew of people he'd grown up with and knew very well. Among others, there was Reuven, a gruff half-orc who was the bosun and like an uncle to Ez, Nyla, the half-elf quartermaster and a strong and commanding presence on the ship, and Rain, a human and the navigator and someone who Ez was incredibly close to. Their first few voyages went smoothly and Ez became confident in his abilities, almost beginning to slide into overconfidence. One day they received a signal from a vessel which seemed to be in distress. Reuven was wary, but Ez offered to let their fellow sailors board for supplies. The sailors turned out to be members of a cult called the Scarlet Brotherhood, and when they boarded the Blue Morpho, they attacked. Ez tried to defend his crew, trying to grab Rain and pull them to safety since they were the closest person to him, but he was wrenched away from them and hurled over the side of the ship. He fought to make it to the surface, but he couldn't, and he drowned in the churning waters. However, the goddess Umberlee had other ideas and decided that that was not Ez's day to die. He woke up washed up on an unfamiliar beach, with no sign of his ship or his crew. Immediately, Ez presumed everyone on board had been killed and the vessel either stolen or sank. He had no idea of the motivation behind it and no idea where to turn. On that day, Ez fell to pieces, and instead of going home and facing the grieving families of those who were lost, he ran away. He changed his name, started speaking in a different accent, and turned to dangerous work and alcohol to get by. He didn't want to die, but he wanted Ez to disappear because he believed that he only brought misery and would bring danger back to his family if he returned home, so his intention was essentially to become someone else. During this time, Ez met two tieflings, twins called Ego and Id. Ego was in a similar state to Ez, not in a great place, and was working for the Thieves Guild, while Ez was involved in smuggling. Both of them encountered each other at their lowest point. Eventually, Ego was invited to join a crew on a ship captained by a man known as Captain Whiskey, and he mentioned Ez might be interested. Not long after, Ez joined the crew as the bosun. This was 7 years after the Blue Morpho disappeared, and his first time working on a ship again. In this crew, Ez met two other people, an Aasimar called Q and a halfling called Shiv. He didn't quite trust them, but he didn't believe they would stab him in the back as soon as he turned away, much like some of the people he'd previously worked with, which was something. One day, in a moment of deja vu for Ez, their ship was attacked by a vessel called the Sea Ghost, and he, Ego, Id, Q and Shiv were the only ones who managed to escape on a lifeboat. They made it to the port town of Saltmarsh, and that was where the campaign began. Thrown together by circumstance, this ragtag party began to undertake work to make money since they had nothing between them. A rivalry between Ego and Ez had already developed, with both of them constantly squabbling over nothing, or daring each other to complete stupid tasks. Id was the stern and sensible one who tried to keep everyone on the task at hand. Q was a kind and gentle presence, and Shiv has always been, and probably will always be, pure condensed chaos in a tiny body. The party got their name while they were investigating a supposedly haunted house in Saltmarsh. A torn-up note they found contained the words "Beyond Skeletons," and somehow it stuck. This was also the same day that Ez almost died to a swarm of spiders because he decided to poke something shiny, and it turned out to be an illusion, if I remember correctly. And then the spiders attacked Id, and it nearly ended very badly. I think it was only due to the kindness of our DM that Ez did not completely die that day, as in not able to be revived, just dead. So that was a bad move on Ez's part, and one of many still to come. When the group acquired a ship of their own, it became known as the Beyond Skeletons after this name they had given themselves. Ego proclaimed himself captain despite having no experience, and despite finding it annoying, Ez never did anything to oppose this apart from making the odd snide comment, because he didn't think he was fit to captain a ship again. The others didn't know Ez ever had captained a ship until one day he overheard a tiefling named Captain Zendros in Saltmarsh mentioning that a ship called the Blue might be returning to port soon. This turned out to be a lie intended to see if anyone in the Beyond Skeletons group had knowledge of this vessel, but it did lead Ez to disguising himself to go and speak to a man called Anders Solomar, a powerful presence in Saltmarsh, and finding that he is a part of the Scarlet Brotherhood. The group then decided, somewhat unwisely, to break into his home when they didn't get the information they needed and discovered an important scroll hidden in one of the rooms. The Brotherhood had targeted the Blue because it carried this scroll, which contained information on something far bigger than the Beyond Skeletons crew had anticipated. Ez had taken this scroll as unregistered cargo for a few extra coin before their last voyage, and had in turn effectively caused the supposed deaths of every member of his crew. Needless to say, he didn't cope with this knowledge well, and this was the point where he confessed to the rest of the crew how exactly he had come to join them and what had happened. Over time, as the crew took on jobs that took them from Saltmarsh to the regions beyond, Ez began to discover the truth behind his abilities. When he was born, he didn't have magic, and he never showed any inclination towards it. But when he woke up after being thrown off the Blue, he found he suddenly did. He had no idea how to control it and spent a long time trying to suppress it, but it wasn't going to be suppressed easily. He used his magic when the Beyond Skeletons crew needed to enter battles, but he never pushed his limits. In fact, towards the start of the campaign, Ez actually wielded 2 daggers, and used them a considerable amount for a spellcaster who really should have kept his distance since he's such a glass cannon. There was a point in the story where Ez eventually sold his daggers and began to focus more on using his magic, and that was a pretty big moment for him. Ez's confidence in himself and his magic was almost entirely a facade, and it still is. Stats-wise, his charisma score is actually 20 now, but most of that is a constructed alter ego which basically carries him through stressful and traumatic situations. The real Ez is a whole lot more nervous and panics when it comes to making intense decisions fast, which, as you can probably imagine, when you're running in and out of fights and dealing with situations like this crew are, that's a problem. Earlier in the campaign, the party passed by Ez's home island of Zephyrist, and after 7 years he finally returned home. This was an emotional moment since Ez's parents had believed he was dead for all this time, and though they were hurt by what he'd done, they forgave him. He basically fell to pieces at this moment of being reunited with them, because there were so many emotions to try and process, and he didn't even know where to begin. Ez has never been known for his bravery or his decision-making, and both of those flaws kind of culminated in his 2 biggest regrets. Taking that cargo onto the vessel in the first place, and spending so long away from home when he didn't need to, because the Brotherhood were not after him, but after the scroll on board the ship. He does have another big regret, but we'll get to that one later. At one point while back in Zephyrist, Ez was also reunited with his half-brother, who is very different to him. His name is Rafe, and he is a human, and he is from their father's previous marriage. He's much more studious and quieter than Ez, and he voiced his concerns about Ez heading off to put himself in danger again. But Ez knew there wasn't much else he could do when the Beyond Skeletons crew still had so many mysteries to unravel. A whole bunch of things have happened through the course of the story that I can't possibly go into here because we'd be here for about a week. But as the campaign went on, the party learned that the Scarlet Brotherhood were involved in a plot also involving an infamous pirate called Tamarot. The plan was to open a portal in the ocean and bring up a creature from another plane of existence, which would basically spell disaster for everyone. To do this, they needed to find several black pearls. So far, the Beyond Skeletons crew have managed to stay one step ahead of the Brotherhood and have managed to acquire several of the pearls themselves, with the help of Captain Zendros, who at the current point is in a relationship with Ego and pregnant with his twins. Like I said, a lot has been going on. Zendros told the party about a place called Firewatch Isle, where she used to work for the Brotherhood. Everyone made their way there and found the place seemed to have been abandoned after some sort of fight, with blood everywhere. Id found something odd in one of the rooms, Ez's sketchbook, which he used to doodle on when he was travelling on the Blue all those years ago. When the group continued through the building, they then discovered several people hiding in a cellar, and one of them was Rain. Someone who was on board the Blue when it was attacked, and someone who was incredibly special to Ez. They were very badly injured and seemed to be afflicted with something called blue rot, which prevented their wounds from healing. However, Shiv managed to use lesser restoration to get rid of it. There wasn't much time, but from the little that Rain managed to say before they fell unconscious, Ez learned that they and the rest of his crew had been forced to work for the Scarlet Brotherhood all this time, except for Reuven, who had died on the day the ship was attacked trying to defend it. The Beyond Skeletons crew started to make their way off the island, but between a monstrous Periton almost carrying Rain away, a rowboat they planned to use suddenly being broken when it hadn't been before, and the person who had brought them to the island on his rowboat mysteriously disappearing, they couldn't escape. The group fled to the top floors of the island's compound, finding themselves cornered by chulls, which are like giant lobster creatures, and undead creatures called drowned blades, and an intense fight began. During the fight, Ez got within range of one of the chulls, believing he was at a safe distance, and he was grappled by it, receiving massive damage to his left leg. Afterwards, Shiv tried to heal it, but it was beyond her capabilities. After this, when they'd finally managed to defeat the creatures, and were trying to find a safe area to rest, the group realised, thanks to Shiv's phoenix familiar Toby, that the crew on the Beyond Skeletons ship were also being attacked, and Zendros teleported to Firewatch Isle to take them across to the ship, where unfortunately they found that many members of the crew that they had hired had already been killed. As well as being a blow for the party, who believed that their crew should be safe, this hit Ego especially hard because he felt like he had failed as captain. And also the whole situation brought a horrible sense of deja vu for Ez, who had now seen 3 vessels being attacked. They buried the bodies at sea and said a prayer to Umberlee, and then made it back to the town of Uskarn. Ez desperately needed medical help, but all the healers were away on the front lines for a war taking place in the Empire, so he had a big decision to make. He could either wait and hope that a healer would come back while being in huge amounts of pain, and be on bed rest for a long time while he recovered, or he could go the other way and have his leg amputated. Decisions, as we know, are not Ez's strong point, so this was a huge moment for him, and he picked the option that would enable him to continue travelling and fighting with the crew, since they needed to immediately head back out again and continue searching for the Black Pearls. The rest of the party were there for him and supported him through every second of it, and Rain was there as well, who by that point had woken up, came into the room in the middle of what was happening, and just took it in their stride and made sure that he knew they were there, and it was a very important moment, I think. The next morning, while Ez was recovering, he got to speak to Rain, and they got to discuss events of the past 7 years and what had happened in between. Rain made a huge confession that they had been forced to make a pact with a creature called the Dark Devourer, which was a creature that the party were going to have to confront. They had made this pact because they believed Ez was dead, and that the only way to bring him back to life was to make this pact as the Brotherhood had convinced them. In return, Ez made a confession of his own, amidst worrying about what all of this could possibly mean for him and Rain, and whether Rain would even survive this, and he decided now is the time, and made a confession that he loved them. They said that they loved him too, and they kissed, and it was a very sweet moment. I loved it. It was very cute, and everyone was just screaming in the Discord chat, on mute, this was in the text chat, and it was just very precious. They then just cuddled for a while and took some time to kind of just be together. On that day, Ego, Id and Shiv also headed out to buy Ez some sort of mobility aid that would allow him to continue travelling with them, and they found a combat wheelchair, which is what you can see him using in this image. It has looked different in previous images because I hadn't settled on its design, but now I'm pretty sure I'm settled on this one. I wanted it to have a good balance between looking like a sports wheelchair and having fantasy elements. He might still customise it more since this is Ez, but this is what it looks like for now. By the way, the combat wheelchair stats are by Mustang's Art on Twitter. I'll put a link in the description below if you'd like to check them out. They're a really good addition to your game for accessibility for disabled characters, and just a really good idea. They also bought him some crutches, which he uses sometimes around the house. Did I mention the BS crew actually matured to the point of buying a house, but mostly he uses the wheelchair. The next day the group had to go to a place called the Pit of Hatred, where several members of the party had to confront elements of their past, including Shiv's previous activity in smuggling, and Ego and Id facing memories of their mother who died when they were young. In Ez's case, he was confronted by Reuven, the bosun of the Blue Morpho, who Rain had told him just the day before had died on the deck of the ship trying to defend it 7 years ago. Or rather, it was something that had once been Reuven, and it was now an undead creature like the ones they had encountered on Firewatch Isle. Reuven temporarily blinded Ez and Shiv and dragged Q underneath the waves, where he planned to sacrifice her for what the party didn't know. Everyone pursued him into an underground cavern where Q was on the brink of death. We have modified death save rules where you need to fail 6 saves to actually die, and Q had failed 5. In that moment, Ez was paralysed with indecision because a small part of him believed there might be a way to bring back Reuven from whatever he had become, and to convince him to stop. But there was no convincing him, there was no getting through, and in that moment of hesitation, Q almost died. She later forgave him, but Id, who is now in a relationship with Q, did not. Id killed Reuven, and Ez managed to dimension door Q to the surface. It was an incredibly tense session, and one that definitely caused a lot of repercussions and some really great character development further down the line. And I really like that as a group we are close enough to be able to play out these very intense emotions and allow our characters to really process them, and then sort of check in on each other afterwards and just make sure we're all okay. After that, they all headed back to Zephyrist and finally enjoyed some rest and downtime while Q recovered. They celebrated a spring festival, Ego and Zendros got engaged, and Id took part in a contest to become the new champion of Zephyrist. She won this title from a woman called Seafree, a Tempest cleric, who also offered to teach Ez better control of his magic. This involved a trial where they went into the sea and Ez was trapped inside a bubble full of water, which he had to break out of using only his magic, which Seafree wanted to encourage him to use without holding back and without fear. He managed it, but it was very close, and he discovered afterwards that most of the trial had been a part of his imagination, since he was quite literally holding himself back. He also learned through this trial that Umberlee, though she had brought him back from death, had no plans to help him any further. He had asked for her help, and she hadn't responded except to send the bubble further into the ocean. Ez realised from this that he needed to figure out a lot of things for himself, and not keep relying on everyone else. It was a really tense session and a really interesting one for me as a player, and a good chance to kind of let loose with his magic. And it kind of coincided well with the creation of this picture which I was working on at the time of the session, because in this image I really wanted him to be kind of letting loose with his magic and just not being afraid to use it, and just letting it kind of go in every direction and not be afraid. So at the current point we've just had session 49 of the campaign, and we're now heading off to retrieve the last pearl. We've just met Shiv's family, finally, which she's been very quiet about for the whole campaign. She's been very evasive, so I'm interested to see more of them, and I'm very excited to see what comes next. It's been a ride, and like I said, I can't really fit in most of what we've done in this video because there is just so much. But I love this campaign so much, and I love how well this party fits together and the way the characters have grown and changed together. And sometimes we can just have several downtime sessions in a row where all we do is RP and our characters just have conversations about things that have happened or things that are happening at the time. They have baking competitions, they play like mini games at the festival, and it's just fun and it helps us to develop these characters and just have a good time. So a little more general information about Ez before I finally finish up this video. His full name is Rakelez Ezra Rosemall. His first name is Orcish in origin, his middle name is human, and his last name is a combination of both of his parents' surnames. So his dad's surname is Roseland and his mum's surname is Greymore. They really wanted him to kind of be able to celebrate both sides of his heritage, and they decided to do that through his name, and he was brought up kind of with influences from both sides, even though Zephyrist is a primarily Orcish nation, and he's been surrounded by many people who are orcs pretty much his whole life. He's definitely smaller than most orcs. He's very tall, he's 7 foot tall, but he definitely doesn't have the muscle, so he kind of stands out a bit when he's in a crowd full of orcs, but I really like that environment and just kind of the culture that our DM has created for them. It feels very immersive, it feels very welcoming, and I just really like it. So Ez's hobbies are sketching, which he used to do a lot when he was younger, but not so much over the last few years. Hopefully he will get back into it at some point. And he also does a lot of sewing and embroidery. When he got his wheelchair, he cut his scarf, which was very long, into 2 pieces and neatly fixed the ends, so that it wouldn't drag on the floor or get caught in the wheels. The scarf was given to him by his dad, it's very sentimental. He told Ez that as long as he had it, he would always find his way home, so it's something that is very important to him. Ez is also demi-romantic asexual. He has no relationship experience before Rain, so as well as being kind of a big character moment for both of them, it's a big deal for Ez, as this is something entirely new to him. He has a very close platonic relationship with Q, who is like his platonic soulmate as we describe it, but with Rain it's something different and it's something he's still figuring out. Ez also loves makeup. He's hardly ever seen without his perfectly applied eyeliner, it's one of his favourite things. And he actually used to have long hair at the start of the campaign, but I decided I wanted something to happen to cut it short, and our DM let me be very self-indulgent. And in a fight, Ez managed to fail to counterspell a fireball, and in that incident a lot of his hair got burned off. And then Id trimmed it for him and did a very good job, and it resulted in what you see now. I'm going to put the links for our DM and all of the other players in the description, so please do go and check them out. They are all wonderful people, they're all amazing artists and writers, and it is an absolute joy to get the chance to play alongside them. If you'd like to see art and recaps and different things from this campaign, as well as some silly audio clips and things like that, please go on Twitter and check out the tag Beyond Skeletons D&D, and you'll be able to see a load of different things in there. We do also often get asked if we stream this game or if we have it available as a podcast. Unfortunately, the answer is no, because it was always just intended to be a private game, and we never expected to get as invested as we are. It was going to be a casual thing, and then it really wasn't. So as for this piece itself, it took me about 10 hours, and as you can see, the composition changed a lot because I received a lot of feedback from the rest of the BS gang on making it work better, because I was being really bad at making decisions with it, which is very on brand for Ez, and I just really wanted to push myself and improve. This probably changed the most out of a lot of my recent work. I made a lot of changes to it, and I don't do a lot of backgrounds, so I wanted to push myself and just try something different and keep pushing out of my comfort zone. I spent a lot of time as well trying to get the lighting right, because I really struggle with drawing convincing lighting, and I'm happy with how it turned out. This is also going to be available as a print if you're interested. I have just made an imprint account. I'm going to be putting some designs on there for people to be able to purchase, so please do check it out in the description box below if you're interested. So I think that might be everything. I think this is my longest video to date because I just had so much to say about this character. I just love him with my whole heart. He means so much to me, and this campaign means so much to me, so I really hope you like him too and that you enjoyed watching this. If you have any questions about him or the campaign or anything, please do drop them in the comment section below and I will answer them if I can. And I really hope you enjoyed seeing the process of this piece coming together. So thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Bye!